There have been a lot of unforgettable factions in wrestling history. The NWO, the Four Horsemen, D-Generation X, Triple X, X Factor. Sadly, there have been a lot of stables who had the potential for greatness, but creative never got behind them. It's a shame, as some of our greatest wrestling memories as fans come from a group of dudes joining together to try and take over the wrestling world. It's almost always a good time, give or take a social outcast or a misfits in action. Besides, if you worked at a place where it was legal to hit your coworkers with a steel folding chair if you didn't like them, you'd probably want some friends watching your back. But sometimes, the sure thing doesn't work out. A promising group of wrestlers is looked over or buried on air, and we are only left to wonder what could have been. Because sometimes Vince McMahon doesn't like us to have fun. Well, I'm Andrew with WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 totally wasted wrestling factions. Number 10, Kai En Tai. It may be hard to think of Kai En Tai as a serious stable because of how goofy and offensively portrayed they were, but there was some actual serious talent in the group. Most notably, Taka Michinoku was one of the best in-ring performers on the roster. Dick Togo had a successful career in Japan, and Funaki wasn't a bad hand in the ring either. They could have either been pushed as a menacing foreign faction or a crew of high-flying babyfaces. Instead, creative saw embarrassing stereotypical comedy, the kind that never, ever makes any money. Kai En Tai's biggest match as a stable was losing to the far less talented Oddity stable at SummerSlam 98, and their most defining moment was of course holding down Val Venus and trying to chop off his big Valboski with a samurai sword. Yes, Vince, because all Asian men carry around a samurai sword. Taka and Funaki stuck around for years after their stablemates left, but were they ever treated seriously for a single minute? Indeed, they were not. Number 9, King Booker's Court. Despite Booker being a you get it, WCW heavyweight champion, he could never quite find his groove in WWE as a main eventer until he became King Booker. In that late career gimmick, he tapped into something profoundly goofy with his fake accent and over-the-top performance, but it worked out magically. You could tell he was having a blast in the role, and his wife Charmel only enhanced the act. He surrounded himself with some really talented badass dudes in Fit Finlay and William Regal. It was a great pairing that was the highlight of SmackDown for the less than 6 months they were together. Unfortunately, the group was plagued with infighting in the storyline far sooner than they should have, and the King and his army were booked to look far weaker than their enemies, the Lannisters. I mean Bobby Lashley and Batista. WWE lucked into something good with the King's Court, but as they often do, they had no idea what to do with it. Long live the King. Number 8, the League of Nations. The League of Nations was absolutely awful. But why? There were 4 talented heels in the group, 2 of them former WWE champions, but together they were a worse mix than a ketchup and toothpaste sandwich. A big part of the problem is that they never had a mission statement. They just randomly joined forces. Give us a reason, WWE. Like they banded together to capture all the titles or to beat up the American wrestlers, or they were pissed off about Full House coming back on the air. Anything. It seemed that the stable existed solely to get beaten up by Roman Reigns twice a week. When 4 guys can't take down one, they should probably just give up this entire wrestling thing. Number 7, the Corre. When CM Punk joined the Nexus, the members of the group had a choice. Go with the man who had been leading them into battle for months, or stay in a stable with Husky Harris and Michael McGillicuddy. Well, Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel defected to join Wade on SmackDown, and Ezekiel Jackson enlisted as the group's enforcer to form the Corre. Wait, 2 R's? Corre? Basically, there were 2 Nexuses. Wait, what's the plural of Nexus? Nexi? Anyway, there were a ton of storyline possibilities, but WWE decided on the interesting route of turning the Corre into a bunch of jobbers. Less than 3 months into their run, they were defeated at WrestleMania 27 by Kane, The Big Show, Kofi Kingston, and mother of God, Santino Marella in under 2 minutes. Even the Job Squad would have lasted longer. Number 6, Fortune. Believe it or not, TNA had a cool stable once, or they could have had one had they not so amazingly messed it up. Ric Flair had recently joined the company known as Total Nonstop Action, and he started to align himself with some homegrown Total Nonstop Action talent. It was a great idea. He could give them a rub, and it would harken back to the days of the Four Horsemen. The execution was terrible though. AJ Styles, Bobby Roode, James Storm, and Desmond Wolfe joining forces was a good start. Then Wolfe got traded in for Kazarian, which wasn't quite a fair trade, and despite Rick wanting to start a new Four Horsemen, and despite there being the word 4 in the name of the group, TNA can't count, and there were 6 members in the group when Douglas Williams and Matt Morgan were added. What's the deal with Fortune? There were 6 guys. It should have been Sixton. No? Okay then. Well, they ended up feuding with EV 2.0, which was an ECW stable that was a good decade past its sell date, and they lost to them at Lethal Lockdown. So Dixie Carter hired 5 guys that had been fired by WWE within the past few years and put them over her own talent. Is it any wonder why 75% of their audience has left in the past few years? Number 5, the Radicals. The Radicals in the WWF were awesome for about 1 week. Their first appearance sitting in the front row of Raw was mind-blowing, and then SmackDown came around and the group lost all 3 of their matches. Wait, Vince McMahon pushing his own guys as superior to his competitors even though he could have made more money? Get out of town. The group then turned heel and their lack of success continued. Instead of being pushed as a dominant faction or dangerous outsiders, they were mid-card. In their first pay-per-view match, they lost to Too Cool and Rikishi, some of WCW's best. Couldn't handle a big dude in a thong and two guys who were like Zack Ryder with dance moves. The following month at WrestleMania, Benoit did win the Intercontinental title. A few months later, the group disbanded. All that talent completely wasted. It was a bungled storyline, the kind that WCW would have made, which is what the group was trying to escape from in the first place. Number 4, Aces and Eights. A group of mysterious bikers had invaded the Impact Zone, and week after week they attacked the top stars in the company. Finally, they had a match at Bound for Glory, their version of WrestleMania. After Aces and Eights won, the first member was finally unmasked. It was Devon Dudley. Are you f***ing kidding me? The next unmasked man was Drew Hankinson, the former Luke Gallows, who is now known as Doc. What?
Yeah. What's up, Doc?
The former Mike Knox, now Nux, joined, which was a nice addition, and then they brought in D'Lo Brown, Wes Briscoe, and Garrett Bischoff. I wish my dad would have helped run a wrestling company. Despite Bully Ray being revealed as the leader and doing some great work, the group was dead. They lost all their big matches, and there wasn't enough talent to keep them interesting. Just like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, sometimes it's best to leave the mask on and let us wonder who is under it, then discover it was Garrett Bischoff all along. Number 3, the Straight Edge Society. Even though CM Punk had held the WWE and World Heavyweight title, it wasn't until he formed the Straight Edge Society that he really came across as a star. Along with Luke Gallows, prior to being Doc, Serena and Joey Mercury, they became the top heels on SmackDown. It was one of the few cool things in the entire company, which of course meant Vince didn't get it at all and screwed it up. Punk remained stuck putting over the top stars, and his stablemates were pushed as ineffective goons like a living Bebop and Rocksteady without Sheamus. At SummerSlam, they had The Big Show, who was tired and boring at that time, and this was in 2010, beat the entire stable by himself. There is no better way to get over a heel faction than having them lose to one man. Luckily, later that night, another promising young, cool stable picked up the win in the main event and... Oh, wait a second, no they didn't. Number 2, the Nexus. Yep, SummerSlam 2010 is basically where the Nexus died, but oh, was their birth glorious. In one of the greatest Raw moments of all time, the 8 men beat the hell out of John Cena, the Straight Edge Society, some WWE personnel, and the ring itself. Poor ring. That night actually could have been the fatal blow to the group because Daniel Bryan choked Justin Roberts with a tie and was fired, but the rest of the group stepped up to keep the angle hot. The company desperately needed new stars, and this faction was getting them a lot of buzz. Unfortunately, WWE got cold feet and wouldn't go all in on them. At SummerSlam, the Nexus lost to John Cena's team in a 7-on-7 match despite outnumbering him 2-1 at the end and DDTing him on the concrete floor. Cena can't even put over a floor. It killed the momentum of the group, and their aura of being dangerous was gone. Cena unwillingly joined them and proceeded to mock them and dominate them all. Within 6 months, the original Nexus was done. Even if David Otunga took over as leader, they wouldn't have been saved. Number 1, the Alliance. Oh man, this one still keeps me up at night, and I wish I was joking. WCW and ECW died painful deaths, and Vince McMahon bought them both for the price of a Big Mac and a medium-sized Coke. Okay, I'm going to try to look at this from another angle. WCW had some comedy characters like Disco Inferno, Alex Wright, and Mike Sanders, but Vince didn't hire any of them and instead made every single WCW and ECW wrestler a comedy act and made them portray idiots. Former top star DDP became a weird motivational speaker, Mike Awesome became a jobber, former cruiserweight champ Gregory Helms believed he was a superhero, and Shawn Stasiak could barely walk without tripping into something. Now, even if Vince thought his guys were better, wrestling is all about perception, so he should have at least made the invading forces look credible but let his roster win in the end way down the line. But he didn't bother, and he didn't bother hiring Glacier either. Instead of WCW versus the WWE still raging on today in some form with separate rosters, he blew through the entire angle in half a year. What should have been the biggest angle and the greatest stable in wrestling history was so completely and totally wasted that 15 years later, it still doesn't feel real. Well, that's the list. Thanks for watching. Let me know if there's any stables I missed out on. I am Andrew with WhatCulture, and you can follow me at Andrew Socek and subscribe to our channel for the best wrestling videos in the entire world.